enterprise and supplier development activities, we dedicate our work to where we currently work on, specifically in the work we do with Eskom. We work on some of their power stations and see that we do enterprise development activities for the future in the regions, which then can tap into our business model.
So where do you see South Africa in this digital world, and where do you think we need to be?
Launched an initiative which is called African Girls Can Code, together with UN Women, and we have 625 young women in 5 countries on the African continent, including South Africa.
Good morning. I'm Matthew Burbidge, the editor of Brainstorm magazine, and I'm very pleased to be here with Sabine Dall'Omo, the CEO of Siemens Sub-Saharan Africa. Welcome.
Thank you, Matthew. It's great to be here.
Could we maybe start our interview with perhaps a bit of history of the company?
Yes, Siemens as a company, we are
Yes.
existing since 175 years. We were founded in Berlin as a startup, and you would say, well, started up in a garage, but in 1847 there was no garages yet, so we had something equivalent. And in South Africa, we came about 10 years later to South Africa, now here almost 165 years. And South Africa was the 4th office which we opened outside of Germany.
What were the others?
St. Petersburg, London, and Berlin.
Okay.
And then obviously Johannesburg, Cape Town, and we...
Was that the gold rush, or was that like gold? The gold was
later on, yes, but there were like 2 areas particular. One was communication. At the time, Siemens, our company, was found on a groundbreaking revolution, the pointer telegraph. That was our core technology, which we developed at the time in 1847. And that was also the first product we sold here in South Africa, because the Boer Republic at the time in Cape Town wanted to know when the English are coming, so we sold the first pointer telegraph between Simonstown and Cape Town. And that is the olden days communication, or the olden day version of the internet, if you call it as such. But
so you sold that to the Boer government?
Yeah, at the time,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And so as obviously the business came in here with communication, in parallel, industrialization took off. The gold rush came along, as you already referred, but these things were basically running concurrently. And as industrialization in Europe took off, a lot of technology has been developed, which was used as well in the mining operation. Because what do you need when you mine? You need electricity, you need something to pump water, and you need conveyor belts and these kind of technologies. And so our business was very strong at the time in these fields, because it was also technology being used in Europe and largely in Germany at the time. And so we really got a strong foot into the South African market, and have been part of many of the developments which took place, particularly here in the Johannesburg region.
Okay, so why do you think your company's been so successful over the years? I mean, has there been some kind of like core mission? How have you been able to roll out this technology for over almost 165 years and be so successful?
Well, one part of Siemens is that our strategy is a fundamental pillar, and we adapt our research and development activities to what our strategy is. Because what we believe is we need to be early adopters of certain aspects which are coming along with the various versions of, industrialization. I mean, we currently in Industry 4.0, as we call it. So our company started out in Industry 1.0. And we have been always looking forward what kind of trends are going to happen in order to improve, productivity, to comply with additional challenges, be it population growth, be it, energy consumption. Now we have a new challenge. We need to look at, how CO2 emission and other environmental aspects need to be tracked. And that means you always need to see how you can optimize for the better good of society. And that's always the aspect which we try to use in our strategic approach, because that's also what drives largely our customers for their purchasing decisions. And so therefore, if you ask me what's the trick, that's our trick to keep current.
Looking ahead.
Yes.
Thank you for that. So you have been at the company since 2004. You started work in 2000. So you've been there almost for 2 decades. Is that right?
Yeah, in South Africa.
Oh, in South Africa. Okay. So what have you seen change over that time?
Well, look, when we look globally, then definitely, I mean, one part is that you see an adaptation of digital technologies in a wide society, and we see that a lot of aspects are going away from just pure productivity outcomes and, making more and faster, but rather also seeing, companies and societies focusing out on how you can look at something holistically. I think that's a fundamental change. We do see that, particular, I think the biggest change we have seen, and it feels so unreal and so far away is since COVID, since, the way on how we have traveled, how we have exchanged goods, was all of a sudden interrupted. But society didn't come to a standstill. We still, we had a few months or weeks, depending on what country it was, to come back to where we want to be. I mean, obviously in China, it took a bit longer to come to a normal, but we came to a new normal. And all of a sudden, things like working from anywhere, working from home, without, where the manager is controlling what you do, but rather on the point of, your self-motivation and your output-driven motivation came into game. And then largely we had to redefine how value chains are coming together. And out of, the COVID situation, the shortages of some of the materials, which was a result thereafter. Now we have, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. That has changed as well, supply of certain goods. Think just about energy, gas. Yeah, Germany was our country where our headquarters is, very much depending on the supply of Russian gas, and they had to make a plan within a very short period of time to keep a country which is that highly industrialized still going. Yeah, so they didn't shut down the plants and the likes, but the adaptation which I have seen since, say, in the last 2 decades, is really that adaptation is much faster, and companies, but also societies, need to adapt much faster. And when you zone in particular into Africa, what we seen in particular the COVID aspect, where everybody, when COVID came out and said, well, Africans have bad, medical care, and Africans have all kind of other underlying comorbidities or diseases, there will be a huge amount of people dying. And, Africa in relation to the size of the population, in relation to the amount of people which actually passed away from COVID, did much better than any other region on the globe, which is fantastic, yeah. And the adaptation and the ability of societies in Africa to connect to new ways of doing, I think is a great opportunity for the continent, and particularly also for South Africa.
Did you have any effect with vaccines? Did you have any? What did you actually do for what were you doing in the country during the pandemic?
Well, one part maybe I have to zone in for a moment into Germany on this part, because during COVID we have one strong arm, which is obviously our Siemens Healthineers. They have been active in developing some of the tests for COVID, rapid tests in the context of the technology they offer. So that is what they did on the global space. We couldn't necessarily deploy it in South Africa, but what was very clear once the mRNA technology was available and tested as a suitable vaccine against COVID, we worked together with BioNTech, and we helped them to upgrade their Marburg factory to an mRNA facility. And what we did at the time is we did that in record time. In less than 6 months, the plant was up and running, producing vaccines. And why could we do that? So what we did is we applied our digital twin technology. So we simulated together with the company on how should the production process go, what kind of skills do we need, what kind of security protocols we need in the individual steps, because remember, that was a vaccine which needs to be kept at a very cool, constant temperature. And so it does require a lot of security mechanisms in the production and in the formulation of the vaccine. And so we did this together with them, what meant we had a concurrent development with the staff of the customer, but also with our technology being adapted to their requirements over the development process. And that's why we could ramp up within 6 months the facility to produce on full-scale vaccines. And that would not have been possible if we would not have had digital technologies being available. But what the benefit out of it was, because the way and how we had technology used to develop each and every step, we also could use, like the requirements from a Food and Drug Administration, or like in South Africa, SAPRA, for instance, where they basically could see that the individual control mechanisms which had been programmed in are compliant with their requirements. What means once you had implemented the technology, you also had the protocols to ensure to them and the documentation that your product is of the quality which is needed to be, approved for human usage. And that we believe was, not we believe, but we all know now, it was a game changer in the COVID response. And so we also used the Siemens South Africa, so with a collaboration we had with BioVac, but also with Aspen, where we used portions of their technology in order to help them to get their plants into productivity. And in particular with Aspen, you will see the external media communication. We also had support by the German government because they wanted to support South Africa to be really a hub for vaccine manufacturing on the continent.
Well, I may have, in fact, had one of your vaccines.
Very possible. Made by Siemens.
Do you do much work with the public sector here?
Yes, we do. We do work with the public sector. So we work with all the state-owned entities, as well as some of the municipalities. Yes.
In what line?
Well, from a Siemens point of view, we are very much in the digital and smart technology. So there are different applications. So if you would look, for instance, in the waterworks, we would help specifically with SCADA solutions, but also measurements for pump stations, electrification of the pump stations, managing again the SCADA of the substations for the pump stations, and having leak detection solutions deployed. Unfortunately, in South Africa, we are not as far as some of our African counterparts, like for instance Botswana or Ghana, which already much further developed in water and electricity management, specifically when it comes to leak detection and also non-revenue losses or non-technical revenue losses. They are much further in detecting and cutting them off.
Well, you just got to drive around Joburg and you see that we're not doing particularly well on the leak detection front. But that's very interesting. So you are now, after 165 odd years, you are now pivoting to become more of a software company.
Yes, because if you look at one part, if you look at Siemens, maybe 10 years backwards, 20 years backwards, we were rather known for, like for instance, mobile technology, many in Africa, and I still get the questions, are you still doing mobile phones? No, we don't do mobile phones.
So you used to make a cell phone?
Yeah, we did make cell phones
Okay.
once upon a time, but we merged this business in 2007 with Nokia, and so divested from it. We did at the time as well the backbone of most of the 3G networks in the African context and GSM network. But what we did is we basically were a conglomerate, and it's very difficult, first of all, for the market to understand what a company which has such a variety of products. I mean, you could buy a cell phone from us, you could have a power plant, you can have automation technology, medical devices. It's very hard to understand, what this company is doing, also to measure us correctly on the stock market. But on the other hand, because you have, these kind of industrial cycle business where you have a fast cycle business, and then you have products like a power plant which has a very long cycle to come to fruition. It's difficult within the company to have the right capital allocation to the business which needs the capital, because you always will use KPIs from business performance to, reallocate to the individual business. So, and we decided a few years ago as a company to separate our activities. We don't have a holding company structure, but we basically set them up as individual ships, if you call them. And then we have also a clear understanding of what kind of performance the underlying business puts forward, and then be able to have the right capital allocation, and possibly also, if needed, get capital from the market, because you also only will get capital from the market if they can understand what you actually do with the money.
Sure.
And so therefore, the division of what the company is now today is so important. So we have, as said, our telecommunication business almost 20 years ago, we merged this away. We separated our healthineers business, our medical business, in a separate legal entity under our majority of shareholding, focusing really on their leading position they have in the imaging and diagnostic market. We have separated our mobility business in a separate legal entity, which is dealing largely with rolling stock, but also signaling technology, which we're also deploying here in South Africa very successfully. And then we have our Siemens Energy business, which we separated into a separate DAX-listed company. And then we have Siemens, the core Siemens, which is really the digital company which you refer to. And at this point in time, we are already part of the top 10 software companies with our portfolio, which we have already in our business. And that includes as well Mendix, our coding software, and Brightly, our building management software.
So Mendix is a coding software?
Yes.
So what are you doing? So that's a solution that people can purchase or use is this to program operational technology?
Yeah, it's basically a low-code software where you, without having detailed coding training, be able to program apps and have deliverables into an industrial process in an application which we use. Yeah, but maybe I can give you a sweetener on this one. You might have followed up that last May we launched an initiative which is called African Girls Can Code, together with UN Women, and we have 625 young women in 5 countries on the African continent, including South Africa, and Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Senegal. And we train them specifically on coding and digital skills.
Are they specifically using Mendix?
And they use particular Mendix in order to get the skills. And there's another aspect which we have embedded into it, and that is cybersecurity. Because what we see from the market is that all our customers are very worried about cybersecurity and how to protect their infrastructure, how to protect their production and their systems. And so we felt when we have this kind of possibility to train young people in, digital skills, then we also need to give them the cybersecurity aspect.
So talk about that cybersecurity solution. I mean, is it a specific Siemens specific solution that you have, or could you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so maybe when it comes to cybersecurity, obviously it cannot be one company alone doing it, because you can protect your systems as much as you can, but you also will know, the criminals in that space, they're always a step ahead, and they have, the resources as well available to see how they can tamper with systems. So what we did is we were the launching partner of an initiative. It's called the Charter of Trust, where we get companies which are somehow in the same field being active in digital technology come together and agree on certain standards on how we want to protect our systems. And so these are companies which are in our same field, but also institutions. And here for South Africa, we have the first institutional partner on the continent, and that is the CSIR, which we have onboarded onto our global initiative to be part of what kind of standards are required to make sure that we can protect our systems best. Can we protect the systems fully? No. I mean, we all are aware that cybersecurity is something which we will need to live with. It cannot be ruled out. Every company is vulnerable, and we need to ensure that our employees, first of all, which are often the weakest link in the whole system,
So they say.
that they are always aware of what kind of, phishing and tampering activities are out in the market, and potentially are, coming into the system by, clicking on links, using private and other devices. So we have a very high standard specifically on the human interface with our networks. And out of what we use for our own protection, we are offering that as well to our customers, because we deploy the same technology onto the solutions which we have developed on our software side, but on our hardware side as well. If you think about a SCADA, if you think about a drive, a switchgear. So we ensure that the standard we apply for our company internally is given to our customers as a benefit.
So, to your knowledge, has any of Siemens SCADA systems been compromised?
Well, I mean, always possible. In the moment, we can isolate any intrusion within 43 minutes globally. So to avoid that any further issues are coming forward. And you also will see that, particular when you do company acquisitions, as we are growing as well into the software market, we bring other sources in because, development, sometimes you also need to bring in from external. That cybersecurity is one of the major milestones within the mergers and acquisitions process to ensure that whatever we bring in doesn't compromise the already existing system.
So you say 43 minutes. I mean, you can detect a incursion in, say, a pump station within 43 minutes. I mean, so is that phoning home every so often? I mean, and how is your technology? Is it just like doing a scan? Is it like scanning itself, comparing itself to itself to see that there's something changing, or how does that work?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously you will look at all kind of abnormal behavior within the process, because the process is a defined step,
Sure.
which is operating according to a certain logic, and so we look at these kind of activities depending of if there are more transactions, if there are unauthorized access being tried to tamper with certain activities, and then we isolate, and that's one of the great advantages which we have with our technology, that we really can go down to the lowest device. So if you think about a metadata management system, so we would be able to isolate the individual consumer who is tampering with it, and you don't have to shut off a whole substation or a whole suburb because there is illegal activity going on. We're able with our technology to really nail it down to the individual consumer, to the block of flats, and make sure that other consumers which are doing the right thing and paying in this context, maybe as an example, that they are not inconvenienced. And that is I think the trick specifically when it comes to digital technology.
So I mean, just so in some ways, I suppose you could say that your company is undergoing some kind of digital transformation. But what? But at the same time, your customers are also doing that. One would imagine. What do you think is holding them back in their journeys?
Well, for once, our customers are looking for partners which can help them to be on this digital journey, because they're also aware, I mean, the aspects which I refer to, supply chain challenges, globalization, being self-sufficient at the individual sites where they are operating, the whole topic around environmental, social and governmental obligations which come on in a company. These are all things you can't do anymore with a clipboard, yeah?
Yeah.
So if you want to have a high output, you want to have a high productivity, but you also want to be compliant with what is required, and you want to give the comfort to your customers, but also to your shareholders that you do the right thing, you need to digitalize. And so we did a review with some of our customers in the industrial space to see what keeps them back. And to one thing is, one of about 45% of them say that legacy systems are keeping them back, because we are currently at a point where the IT technology and the OT technology are coming together. And, IT is normally a separate department in big corporations, so they run with all the IT aspects. And then you have another department which runs the production of a product, of a solution, of water, electricity, and these two departments have to merge together, because it is not anymore possible to keep it strictly separate. And here, definitely legacy systems, which are largely driven from accounting related aspects, need to adapt what is actually happening on the shop floor. And that is one aspect where a lot of companies are worried how they have this transition done in their own company. And then the second big worry our industrial customers on the globe have is largely related to they want to have a partner which can do that with them. And what companies don't want, and anybody who has ever done that will know it's not a good idea to have a bespoke solution for your company. Which brings you into dependency from whoever has programmed it for you or installed it. It makes sure that it will be very difficult for you to keep, your staff filled in from the market with the skills available. So you do want to have a sophisticated solution, but you don't want to have a bespoke solution. So you want to have something which has a kind of a standard, but is still adaptable to what your requirements are. And that is exactly what we are doing with Accelerator, which is our digital ecosystem, because we believe it's not one company alone which will be able to solve it. Siemens cannot be at every location on the globe, and the same is valid for our competitors. So the idea is really to develop ecosystems of partners which come in a kind of a collaborative way, not only with partners who can tap into some of the solutions we provide as a standard, but also work together with the customer to have adaptation of that solution to their particular needs. So you have a triangle of partners working together in a collaborative way, and we call it the digital ecosystem.
So you've got partners, you've got a partner ecosystem in South Africa as well?
We have some.
Okay. And they would be the large SIs, system integrators?
There are some of the system integrators, but it can also be, you must consider that some of the requirements which we currently roll out are different to what we have done maybe in the past. Because if you think about just, CO2 emissions, if you want to track that, if you are a multinational, and you have an operation in South Africa or on the African continent or anywhere else on the globe, and you need to comply with European law, American law, and you need to demonstrate that you have reduced your emission according to your commitment you have given, then you need to tap into all aspects of your production. So what means you have scope 1, scope 2, scope 3.
Indeed.
And so scope 1 is obviously easier because it's your own operation, but
Yep.
as further you go down the value chain,
Gets more difficult
you
to-
need to see, how can I make sure that, whatever comes from my sub-supplier, from my transportation company, how can I make sure that they do the right CO2 reduction in their process when they supply into my manufacturing. If you think about the automotive industry, which is just in time, everything is coming from, a tier 1, tier 3, 2 supplier. So that kind of data you need to get out of the system. And so we believe that these are traditionally areas where we would not have applied productivity and automation on, but we now need that information. So there are new partners coming in, which are, dedicated to these kind of fields of operation.
I mean, I think it's going to take trillions of dollars and euros to actually effectively mount some kind of just transition, especially for people in countries in Africa. I've read that, heat pumps are quite a hot topic in Germany at the moment. I mean, how do you see our just transition playing out here?
Well, look, I mean, from a South African point of view, and maybe we zoom into Africa first before we come to South Africa. So in Africa, a lot of the activities are already possible with green technology. If you look at a country like Rwanda, like Kenya, they have 90% and more of their electricity already carbon neutral. I mean, they have geothermal, they have solar, they have hydro plants, they have wind. So they're already there because that's the resource they had available. They never had coal, so it wasn't really an option for them. They didn't have gas. So they already transitioned into green technology, and which gives them currently an advantage because they themselves as countries are very attractive to investment for multinationals again, because they need to buy from CO2 neutral operations. And you have obviously the countries in West Africa, which are largely depending on oil and gas. If you think about Nigeria, and you have South Africa and the neighboring countries, which are very much depending on coal. So for once, I mean, we do need to make sure there is a difference between OECD countries and non-OECD countries. And obviously the African countries are non-OECD countries, because you cannot expect countries which didn't have the opportunity to have the fruits from an industrialization to be able to put the capital forward to have a just energy transition done in the same time than anybody else who already filled the bank account, if you call it as such. Yeah. So I think there is a difference, and also the expectation is a difference. But on the other hand, if you think about for once that coal and oil and gas will be going away because technology is going to change, and think about that, for instance, in Europe, from 2035, you are not going to get a private car which has a combustion engine. I mean, this is 12 years from today. And in the context, when you look back, and we as a company can do that to a long time, 12 years is nothing. So if you don't, what's happened in 12 years to oil and gas? Because a big portion of where it's used for is for transport. And that means as well there will be an adaptation for heavy load, for instance, for trucking, for rail. We're working on hydrogen trains, which are already partially piloted and in operation in Germany. So these kind of technologies are going forward, because specifically the heat wave they had now the last couple of weeks in Europe, and the fires. If you think about Greece, main holiday season, people have to be flown out from their 2 weeks holiday they have saved for the whole year. That is changing the mind rapidly. And so most probably will be at a time where these kind of commodities are not used to that extent than they have been, and so the market will adapt in any case. So that's one part. So the market dynamics will shift to a different output. When we come then back home to coal, well, I mean, the energy plan currently foresees, the IRP, that we will still have coal as part of the mix, and, you know, in the context of the non-OECD requirement by 2050, also a possibility, and that gives us a bit more time to deal not only, you know, with coal per se, but to deal with societal matters which come with it, because obviously the extraction is very much in two provinces, and people have employment there on the basis of mining operations. Societies are existing, so it is not something which you can, you know, switch off tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it needs a good social compact, not only with, you know, the utility, in that case maybe Eskom, yeah, which produces coal electricity, but it also will come with the requirement by companies being active in the regions, but most probably as well the full business society to commit to help these people and these regions in the social transition to, for instance, a digital economy. Yeah? Because if we look at it, South Africa is one of the countries which has the best conditions for renewable energy. And we have possibilities specifically as Europe is decarbonizing and they need hydrogen. I mean, they have not a lot of sun and they are not able to produce as much hydrogen they need for the operation of the steel plants, the chemical plants. Yeah, it will become more expensive. We know electricity, the price will go up and it will be more scarce. But South Africa is greatly positioned to be a major player in that field of operation and creates another portion, you know, to strengthen our GDP. And that's why we need to put our effort on it to also, you know, change the GDP composition within South Africa to a lesser dependency on coal.
Yeah.
And in the moment, it's a temporary time where the product is very much in demand when we get to the harbor. But the adaptation will happen. And so as we know it will change, we need to help the people now to transition in 10 years into new skills. And if you think, I mean, I was born in a region where coal mining was, the order of the day, and the coal mines started out in the first phase of industrialization, and at the end of the 60s and 70s, there was hardly anything left. I think the last coal mine was somewhere close in the 80s in the region where I'm from. And today, the region is the development hub for green technology. And I think these are...
What region is that?
It's a Ruhrgebiet in Germany.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the biggest region. I think about 6 or 8 million people live in alongside cities, which are basically now one big city. But it's a hard transition, and it's not happening overnight, as I mentioned. And so that's why we also want to, with our enterprise and supplier development activities, we dedicate our work to where we currently work on, specifically in the work we do with Eskom. We work on some of their power stations and see that we do enterprise development activities for the future in the regions, which then can tap into our business model for the future.
So I'd just like to maybe bring this to a close, but you know, I mean, you mentioned earlier on about the 4R, and I'm often of the opinion, I often think that particularly our public sector speaks a good game when it comes to digital technologies, whereas we are often seem to be struggling with more prosaic challenges. So where do you see South Africa in this digital world, and where do you think we need to be?
Well, for one, I think South Africa has a good opportunity at this point in time, yeah, because we currently don't have sufficient electricity, what means we have the possibility, while we have to put up new stuff in order to bring energy into the market, to do it in a digital space. So to invest into, smart SCADA system, we need to integrate renewables into the grid. I mean, you would have had the discussion around the grid allocation slots, which was just in the media this week. So that all requires digital technology, because you can't manage it like you did in the olden days from one central point, because you have all of a sudden many more interfaces. You will have, people which have solar on their roof, which I want to feed into the grid. So you need to have a kind of a mechanism to help these prosumers. We call it the grid edge, by the way, to enable this. You need to have a billing tariff. And we are actually at the time where we can make all these decisions right now. The same is for transport. In the context of also optimizing again, beside of getting the rolling stock really physically going again, but I mean through signaling technology, to preventive maintenance, like we have a tool, Railigent, which basically looks at, when do you need to change certain components.
Is it vibration based?
No, it's like a sensor-based type of technology, and which helps you to look at when do I have to do certain things, so that you avoid that a cargo breaks down, and these kind of things we can deploy now because we have the sense of urgency, and we can put that forward. And one of the big hinderings we have to some extent is the way on how our public procurement system works, because we don't want to have a dependency on only one. So the state or particular companies which have to procure in the public procurement space, they need to split it up into several suppliers to not have one dependency, which is a good thing because it should avoid, that somebody is exploiting the taxpayer. So the intention is a good one. But, as we are moving into a more digital technology, and you need to have integrated systems, you can't do that with a multiple amount of, OEMs, for instance. You need to define on some kind of technology which you then deploy, because otherwise you don't get the maximum effect out of it. And here, particular, bringing IPPs, but also privatizing portion of rail and harbor network will enable to make that happen, because once you're in the private field, you don't have the worry of corrupt activities, because a private company is out to make profit, and there are other mechanisms to safeguard that is done in the correct way. And therefore, South Africa, from my point of view, is actually at a very, very good brink, because sometimes, not having done enough in the past helps us now to be not stubborn to the future, because we don't have much of an option. You are not going to find many companies which are going to build you coal-fired power stations. Even Chinese and Indians have different challenges. So, as I said, the market is adapting by itself, and global demand will define what is still available in the market, and on that part, South Africa just falls in to what is available in the market. And so therefore I think the country per se is at a good point at this current time to make a significant change, and the initiative also from the business community to support the government in some of the thinking is exactly around how can we make sure to fix the current immediate crisis, but then really think ahead, And I must say, I'm quite excited about it.
And you sound like you're cautiously optimistic.
I am.
Sabine, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. It was lovely.
Thanks.
Thanks.